Utility grid discussion about DER. By the way, Richie, this is a brilliant arrangement. So my name is Ann Moore from Aviva, which is Schneider Electric is the largest shareholder of. After 40 years, OSI South now is part of Aviva. So I guess most of you probably have heard of or even used our PI system, traditionally known as the PI historian. Yeah, so that's us. It's all about data, especially in our industry. Now with DER, so the data just lots and lots and exploded. So it's my honor to moderate this panel, and we have 3 distinguished speakers and industry leaders. We're going to share from all different perspectives. So Henny from California ISO, from ISO RTO perspective, and then Larry from Portland General Electric, IOU, Integrated Utility perspective, and last but not least, Mark from United Power, and from co-op, distribution side perspective. So each panelist will share 10 minutes talk, and then we're going to have Q&A and exciting open discussion. So pay attention. So Henny, you're first.
Good morning. Henny Alarian, Executive Director for California ISO, Power System Technology Operation. I'm going to talk a little bit faster so I can catch up with the 10 minutes. So if you don't pay attention for a minute, you're going to miss the slides. This is Cal ISO. You can look at it, analyze it. The important part, we used to have a peak that we hit in 2006. It was 50,270. We just jumped this year for the first time. We hit a new peak, which is 52,000. That's 2,000 megawatt more than we've ever had before. It's an interesting time. Cal ISO is really 3 different entity in one, or 3 different functionality in one. We used to be market balancing authority. And since then, we actually moved in multiple area. We have the Western Interchange Imbalance Market, and the RC West, were Reliability Coordinator for the West. So as you can see, we actually have expanded pretty much the West, plus we have 21 entities now as an imbalanced market, which means real-time market, but not day ahead and future. But for California, we pretty much do all of it for market-wise. Interesting things to keep in mind is 2045, we're going to be 100% renewable. Challenging goal. We'll talk about it. Maybe you have questions. We did hit 103.5% of our renewable energy. Now people say, well, how do you go above 100%? That means I have more renewable than I have load. We ship it out. For our Western Energy Imbalance Market, we've been saving a lot since 2014 for everybody. We're a not-for-profit, so we actually, all this gets passed to the consumer. It's interesting that it's 2.91, but remember, we started with 1, then 2, then 3, and this year we did 5 EIM entities, and next year we have another 3. And just this summer, we saved $500 million with the big heat. So that tells you a little bit something about the future. Our wind is 6,400. There are other ISOs that have more wind than us. On the solar, we're pretty across the 14,000 megawatt and growing. We also, it's interesting, we have about 12,000 megawatt of behind the meter rooftops capacity. And that we don't really see, but it affects our demand. Our storage device has been moving a lot. Recently, we have over 3,000 megawatt. We probably go to 4 or 5, and it's going to keep going in that direction. That's an important piece. One of the things you got to pay attention is In 3 hours, we did almost 18,000 megawatt. That's sustained 100 megawatt ramp rate a minute for 3 hours. So that tells you there's some hours I need 300 megawatt. That's a lot of ramp. That is the interesting one is new this year is the first time we have, we call it Amber Alert, but it's really not an Amber Alert. It's the governor send a signal. Everybody in California that have a phone gets it and says, hey, please conserve. It made a difference this year. It's a big, powerful thing, but it's interesting for when you look in the future is what is possible with demand response and capability. Few trends, this is our hottest day, happened September 6th. We have 2 weeks worth of heat. It was definitely different than the previous year. It's one in 10 to 20 years. It keeps happening every year. As you can see, the load was picking up, and we got to a point we didn't have enough. 2 years ago, we did load shedding. This year, we were successful. We actually have a lot more load, but we still didn't do load shed, and that was due to all the different things that we've done in the last 2 years to make sure we don't. And if you notice, we got to a point that we ran out. We did EEA1, and it still needed more. We did 2, then we did 3, then we did the governor alert, and we actually survived it. Just a little bit picture of the different resources that we have. As you can see our natural gas where it's at. You see that green one where we have solar, but it comes up, it stays pretty good. The biggest issue for us is between 4 and 9 p.m. because the solar start dying, the load is still picking up, and those 4 or 5 hours are the toughest 5 hours. Completely different model than we've had 5-10 years ago. This is our storage device, and if you can tell, we actually try to discharge him and then discharge him when we really need it. The state of charge is a new concept. Doesn't, you try to model storage device like a generator. They're really not a generator. They consume, they're pro-consumers, right? So they can go either way. So you have to really figure out how to charge it and discharge it and when, and make sure that it's available for capacity. If you notice, we actually charge it to get ready, but then between 1 and 4, we needed them. So we start discharging them, but then we got into, okay, I need them again because the peak is going to get worse, so we start charging them again. So these are new concepts in running the grid when you start looking at storage device. And that's all I have. Keep it short. Thanks, Larry. Thank you.
All right, good morning. Larry Beckendall, Portland General Electric. Great to be here. Portland General Electric, Northwest, roughly 950,000 meters, about 2.5 million customers, 50,000 electric vehicles, and a bunch of customers that drive through and use and keep driving. So how many customers do we have? I think it's changing very quickly in terms of transportation. Great discussion both earlier this morning. Haney, thank you for bringing the California picture. When we hit September, and this year I think there were 16 total EEAs, energy emergency actions in September. And tells you a little something, what's going on with the grid right now. And so when I think about changes that are happening, climate change, a lot of people want to argue, et cetera. All I can say is that since 2020, we had a micro burst that blew down about 5 miles of our 500 kV transmission towers, followed that with the wildfires of Labor Day. That was all a northerly wind that came down that normally doesn't happen in the fall time. But now it's happened this year as well as 2020, but the wildfires that occurred in 2020 were horrendous, the 1 in 50-year event. Followed by the spring ice storm, where we had 2 inches of ice. Again, the 1 in 40-year event. Followed by the heat bubble in the summer of 2021, where Portland was at 116 degrees. And it was just kind of that northwest bubble. And if you go through phenomenon, what happened in the atmospheric layers, et cetera, we can expect to see more. And so we're living the dream as far as change in terms of what's going on with our climate, and it's impacting how we think about resiliency and how do we operate the grid. And it leads me to think also decarbonization, and that's where we're driving. Our customers really want to go there, and we want to save the planet. So it really is important. So federal legislation, what do we call it? Uncle Bill and Uncle Ira. So both of those coming on. The chip bill, 15% of the chips in the nation are produced right in our service area in Portland. And so we feel that impact, those loads that are coming up. And from the IRA, we're going to also see solar coming really hard into our space. And if anybody can advise on communities, please do, and advise that they make it a microgrid. Don't just leave solar out there. Make it resilient, and it becomes a DR product or a distributed energy resource, if you want to think of it that way. We'll talk about that for here in a minute. But there's influence there. So transportation electrification, throw that on top. Throw the home electrification on top. And we start to think about forecasting. And when Haney was showing this summer, our peak, Portland General, was in that heat bubble. So we went 10% higher than anything we'd ever seen prior to that. So 4,400 megawatts for us. And okay, you get the feeling that, okay, our previous peak was 4,100 megawatts. Well, this summer, again, a summer later, not a bad 97 degrees, not 116 degrees. What's the load? 4,250. So everybody that didn't have air conditioning the year before now has air conditioning in their house. And the loads came up. So how did you forecast? And if you're using your typical planning, and that's why a great discussion yesterday on planning, if you're using the rolling 15 years, the last 2 years just blew that apart. So I'm not sure I want to trust the last 15 years. How are we planning for it? How are we thinking about the scenarios? And so great discussion on planning yesterday. And so when we stop and think for a moment, we reference ourselves, we say, okay, we're in an industry where we generate electricity, and it's traveling at the speed of light, and it's got to have a load over here to be utilized at the same instant. And when those get out of sync, voltage goes off, frequency goes off, bad things happen. We damage equipment, we trip things off, not a good situation. And so we've all been there where the morning load goes up and we chase it and we bring the generation up, and down in the afternoon, we chase it, we bring it down in the afternoon. So we're always in sync. But then came renewables, and all of a sudden the generation's moving over here. And what am I doing? What do I got to use? What can I counterbalance that with? And we use hydro in the Northwest. We exhausted all that because we put too much wind in, and we have battles associated with it. What can I do over here on this load side so that I have some ability on both sides of this? And that's the whole argument, the discussion that we're bringing up. And so this morning's discussion about a product that helps customers think about and how can they participate. And by the way, Colin, thanks. He's there in Portland and helping us in our smart grid test bed. But what I would say is that customers don't want to think about it. They want it to be plug and play. They want to know what's happening. And oh, by the way, we got to think about automation on the edge of the grid. But if we're living on the edge, literally, in how we operate every day, we need all the tools we can get. And so when I hear digitization, I think about artificial intelligence, machine learning. I think about advancing ourselves way beyond what we've done in the past. We can't allow an operator sitting in the desk to operate off a gut level anymore. They really need to see the data, understand, and make decisions. Now, obviously, in many ways, the decision is going to be made for them because of the automation that we put in. But I have become a firm believer. We recently built a new control center where we put in not only the transmission, the balancing authority, the distribution, ADMS, so we can get visibility in the distribution. But we also put into that same space, our power operations. And again, SOC rules, so got to maintain all that. But we also put physical, cyber, and network security in that same space. And believe you and me, given the announcements of the North Carolina substation attacks this week, we had our own last Monday. And in the Northwest, there have been a number of them here since June. There seems to be an issue. And I think given the activity and the way we're working with the FBI, I think there is an issue going on. And so all of us need to be really heightened awareness on physical security as well as cybersecurity and our networks. So I call that out as, okay, I need visibility into the system. And so as an operator, I've got to think about that. And if I'm wanting to get flexibility with load, I don't want to have to think about each of those loads, just like customers don't want to think about it. So we're building a virtual power plant, separate from the dispatchers on the floor. Dispatchers want to turn things on and off. They don't want to have to think about, is that generator up and running? Is it fueled? Is it temperature too hot? Is that solar farm running? Is that transportation, electrification, should they be charging, not charging? What can I do with them? So we're building virtual power plants. One, we have a distributed standby generation, backup generation for customers, 130 megawatts, 63 sites that we operate. That's our contingency reserves. I can see the same thing with transportation electrification, charging stations. We've got 90 of them that are in the works for the next 2 years that want to build out. And I hope you all are working with your customers because they're going to come fast. And those are huge loads. And then you think about the demand response. Good example, we have a nitrogen gas producer who does it for the chip manufacturers, who has an opportunity now. He can ramp up 6 megawatts instantaneously. That's a great DR. How can I work with that to make sure that we're doing it at the right times when it's available? And again, there's a shared purpose. We have demand response, roughly 75 megawatts of our customers. We need to move that. We need to improve that. So my target, as we see it going forward, 25% of our capacity is going to come out of the distribution system. So that's roughly 1,600 megawatts for us on a 4,400 megawatt system by 2030. Oh, by the way, we're going to add 3,000 megawatts of renewables. We're going to add 1,000 megawatts of batteries on our system at the same time. So if anybody thinks they're bored in our industry right now, come see me. Thanks.
All right, good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
All right, well, it's great to be here. And as I looked around the room yesterday and today, I realized there's bits and pieces of my past that keep showing up. I started at a small distribution utility in Vermont, then spent 8 years at the Electric Power Research Institute, where I was paid to help people dream. Then 8 years as a management consultant, where I was frustrated for 8 years trying to get people to put those dreams into place. Then 8 years as the CEO of the Western Area Power Administration, where I could move the dream forward, and now United Power, where I get to live the dream every day, back to the distribution business. All of you who've flown into the Denver airport know where my service territory is. If you've seen the growth around the Denver airport, that's us. We are the largest co-op by load in the state of Colorado, approaching 600 megawatts. We've got roughly 107,000 meters. I'll contrast that for you. It took 80 years to get to 80,000 meters. It's taken 5 years to get to 107,000 meters. We're blowing the doors off in every regard, which has its benefits and its challenges for us. Now, I always say there's 2 slides in every presentation I give that I want you to remember. This is the first one. I'll give you a hint on the second. The challenge for all of us operating in the utility world today is not what's real, but what's perceived as real. And every single day that I come to work and my folks come to work, we're finding that the perception of our communities is in direct contrast with the reality of what we have to do as an operator of a distribution system. We've talked a lot in the last 2 days about things, societal changes, whether you've got Nest thermostats, whether you've got some underlying blockchain trading technology, obviously battery storage and home control devices. Those have been here for years. They're now coming more, and we have no idea where they are. Most of us have no concept of how to control and manage through the system. Close to home for me every day, I've got 5,800 EVs and plug-in hybrid vehicles on my system, and I control 21. This number is going up between 100 and 200 per month. It is ramping like crazy, and we have no ability to control them. I've got 9,400 of our 107,000 meters. 9,400 of those homes now have solar rooftops, and I control absolutely none. The same thing with the battery walls, and our system peak is growing was 600 megawatts this summer. Even today, on a relatively cool day in Denver, we're at 420 megawatts. That's up 20 megawatts per day from last year. So all of this is going on in the background while we try to figure out the new future for us. And of course, this is a question from my perspective of what's the choice versus the risk, right? In the olden days, we controlled everything vertically. It was a hell of a lot easier to run. We knew exactly what was going on. We took all the risk as a utility. And as we push all of this out to consumers or customers or in co-op world members, the assumption of risk now is moving towards the member, and yet we're still responsible to make sure the lights stay on regardless of whether those inverters are running on the rooftops. And it's an interesting challenge for us every single day. Now, I'm going to have, if you cue up this video, this gives you a little history. We need some sound there, too. Any sound possible? Guys in the back?
Maybe you can add a mic.
All right, well, this is kind of a cute video of kind of where we are. It loses some of the flavor without the sound. Bottom line is we're changing our power supplier. We're moving from having a G&T, generation and transmission organization, to being on our own because our growth is so large. And that means a whole different way of thinking for us as a distribution utility. We'll send you the link to this because it's kind of a cute thing. Don't worry about it, guys. We'll move on. Or maybe we won't. The bottom line for us is, because of all these changes that are happening in our service territory, I've got to figure out how to manage the system and very much integrate with the larger grid on my own. That's my challenge every single day. If I can just get to the next slide, that'll be fine. There we go. So the question always is, what does the future hold, right? I know Niels Bohr, the physicist, said the predictions, particularly about the future, are difficult. But I can tell you what I'm seeing every day as a CEO of a growing distribution cooperative. First and foremost, centralized generation is going away. This isn't a question about coal or gas. I'm just telling you what's happening in my world. We know exactly what's going on. It's impossible right now to build transmission lines. And I'm a transmission guy. Remember, 8 years, I spent billions of dollars. I had $3.25 billion burning a hole in my pocket. I can just tell you in the West, getting a transmission line built, it's probably easier to site a nuclear plant. Now, understand what I'm saying. I want to build transmission. That's not the question. But for running my job today, so what are we doing? We're moving to become a distribution system operator as opposed to simply a distribution operator. FERC 2222 is the gateway for me. And by leaving my current power supplier, besides lowering the costs, because they're so out of market, and the punchline is my current power provider limits me to 5% of renewables and penalizes me for having batteries. So you can read a lot about that. Talk to me privately. My vision for where we're going, and I think the whole industry needs to go, is to be a network provider, right? We're agnostic with our Apple Watches, our cell phones, or iPads. It doesn't really matter, right? The network is king, and that's where we're going. We've driven that into our strategic roadmap, and there's a lot more detail on our website about it. And the bottom three are the really important things. How can we be flexible? How can we take advantage of the fact that 10% of our members, and soon to be 20%, will have solar roofs? A growing percentage will have battery storage. We've got to constantly maintain and upgrade our systems, IT and OT. And so that's what our world is becoming. And I think that's a key, when I listen to all of this, We need a market quickly. So what's our approach? We're taking a no-regret strategy. Down the left-hand side, you see all the inputs, and there's many more, right? There's home control, there's all the demand response programs that we operate. Our goal is to take that into the systems that we have, whether it's distribution energy management, SCADA system, AMI, or OMS, and figure out what I call an overview system. I want to be able to take advantage of those 10,000 solar rooftops, whether or not I control them. I want to be able to calculate what's happening with those batteries, with the industrial customers. I have 5,300 oil and gas firms, 5,300 oil and gas wells in my service territory. We're doing downhole geothermal. I need to operate this as a system and then link back into the market. Link back to make sure that I can control my world first up close, and then take that nodule and connect it out in the distance. Right? I used to say that we're going from a one-way to a two-way system. That was my EPRI pitch, and I'm wrong. We're going from a one-way system to 1,000 points of light. And that system is happening whether or not we have any control, any investment, any desire to control it. So we have to figure out, how do we organize that chaos? Now, I threw the slide in here because this is the #1 question I get in Colorado. How can Colorado avoid the mistakes of California and Texas in the new energy future? It is the #1 question I get from my board, from customers, from members, you name it, the governor. First, we need the power market now in Colorado. There's plenty of people who believe that, and one or two that want to fight it. We need it now. I keep urging it. The legislature said 2030. I tell them they're on drugs. We're going to have it by 2025. It's Colorado, right? We legalized marijuana. That was that reference. We've got to manage our distribution systems locally. We have to be able to link back out in a much broader scale to take the power of the investments that our members are already making. It's free. Whenever I hear somebody bitch about net metering, it makes my eyes cross. Let's take advantage of that. Stop complaining. Move on. It's like Ma Bell complaining about cell phones. That world is gone. We need to have a balanced portfolio. So for us, it's going to mean making sure we have natural gas as well as renewables, as well as storage, as well as intelligence. And this is about physics, not politics. I'll leave you, this is the other slide that I'd like to leave folks with. 3 radical thoughts. First and foremost, the kilowatt hour is dead. Let's lose it. And I don't mean that from an engineering standpoint, because how many of you know what you pay per kilowatt hour? Okay? And you're utility nerds, right? You barely know how many kilowatt hours a month you use. Let's get rid of that. Let's figure out what the free nights and weekends world is, which gets to the other one on the edge, which is all you can eat energy. From 10 to 2 in most markets, there's a surplus of energy. Let's put a buffet price on it and move it. Right? We heard it yesterday about storage with those buses. Let's just get onto this. And I know it makes the regulatory community crazy, but that's where we need to go. And the last thought is, we need to move to time of purchase versus time of use. And what do I mean by that? When you fill your car, your motorcycle, your van, your bus up, that's a time of purchase rate. When you've got an EV, and I drive a Tesla, as well as a Ford F-250, when I fill up my Tesla, it matters when I'm actually buying it. It doesn't matter when I use it. So bottom line, from my perspective, we got to make sure we're all pulled together. We manage our systems closely. Then we link to the broader world and take advantage of all the investments that our members / customers are making. Because guess what? That ship has sailed. We tend to think we have control, and all we end up with is the California situation, what Larry was talking about. Right? We're running behind the bus all the time. So thank you so much.
Okay, so before we open up the questions, so I have one handy for you, because one of the slides you show 2045, our goal. So supposedly, I live in San Francisco. So in California, we reached the carbon neutrality goal, right? So please explain the grid you envision at CalISO. Help us paint the picture at that time.
That's a good point. Best way to look at 2045, which is 22 years from now, is look backward 22 years ago. We have zero solar, not much wind, no storage device. I think at that time it was 56K, your best internet connection. And now jump 22 years in the future, you probably have 22, 23 terabyte on your internet, so the communication is not an issue whatsoever. Solar might be sitting around 50, 60,000 megawatt, at least in California. Storage device, probably 40,000 megawatt. I'm giving you numbers that in 22 years you can come back, and if I'm wrong, I'll buy you a ticket anywhere in the US, if I'm still alive. But the interesting part is you have to really look at what's gonna be different between now and then. We have a tough road ahead of us because there's a lot of things to do. What Mark and Larry mentioned is we're reacting and we need to be a little bit ahead of it. DSO, distribution system operator, is critical. 20 years ago, we started ISO 2025, and I think that is well established and got that part, but we don't get into all the distribution side. And I like that sense concept, which is the prosumer have to be fully integrated in two-way communication, like a SCADA system, with everybody in the whole nation. It's gonna be actually balancing not based on generation movement. It gotta be balanced across the board. And it have to be set in a way it's set it and forget it. You cannot actually tell the people don't wanna be working for the utilities. They're okay with spending 5-10 minutes configuring their preferences and done with it. And then you figure out how to do all of that stuff, and your pool pump and your water heater and everything does things automatically. I think we're gonna get there to 2045, which is 22 years away, but there's a lot of changes along the way, and it's gonna be a rough ride.
How about you, Larry, from utility perspective? Portland General.
2045.
Yeah,
Okay.
fast forward.
2045.
Fast forward.
Fast forward. Well, number one, and I love, Mark, your ideas and usage and the customer side. My worry is reliability. So without knowing what's happening, if I'm operating blindly, I'm going to have a reliability issue. That's where I'm going to head to. So I loved when you think about Sense this morning, and they're showing customers and the usage. Various of those devices are weather related, and some of them are not. And so you can break that down, and now I can forecast based on what's going to happen with each of those from a meter perspective, right on through the feeder to the substation to my balancing area. I have a really good chance of forecasting what's going to happen. And then I can start to do pricing and think about how do I influence and change things, et cetera, to cause maybe a behavior change because the economics are different. But I need to know that basics. I need to know the information. So when I think of 2045, I start to think about the analytics. And I'm going to use a case in point here recently where one of those supply chain logistics companies that has these mega warehouses of 1 million plus 3 million square feet, and they have lots of packages in them. And in those packages, there's variety, and they have robots that move the packages around. And every night, and you can imagine how many millions of packages in a 3 million square foot warehouse, but every night they optimize for tomorrow's deliveries. And many times it's based upon the 3 clicks that you made and your selection. So you start to think about the analytics associated with that. And we have a tough time keeping track of 100 crews, let alone millions and millions of packages. So how do we take that sort of information and apply it into our system to really advance us? And that's where I see us in 2045, is that sort of data, that sort of information moving from customer generation across the board, and we're able to optimize the system. And my one other fear is, this session I know is open energy markets. We got to make sure that we get the markets right. And by that, I'm going to share another example that we had for the technology committee of GridWise. We brought in MISO to come and talk about how they're deploying the 460 aggregators that they have in their system. And they just started that, and they're just like IPPs or generators. They bid in, which is great, and it could be energy, it could be capacity or other ancillary services, and then they get a target from the market operator that tells them what they're going to do. Well, that's great. These are aggregators spread out in utilities like Mark and I, and Haney, I guess you've got them as well, but under FERC Order 2222, they get to bid the wholesale, and then the wholesale marketer gives them a direction. Oh, by the way, they at the same time send it to the balancing authority. But how does the balancing authority get it to Mark, who's got the distribution that he's operating, so that he has the information to be able to operate and optimize the system? So, in my opinion, we've got it wrong. Because now Mark doesn't have the opportunity to optimize that piece of the system because he's finding out after the fact. And he really wanted to do something different that was going to operate in the constraints that he has. So we got to get the markets right, too, as we move forward and think about how we can push into the distribution. But I absolutely think it's the right way to go. So that's 2045, sorry.
Mark, anything to add?
Yeah, as bullish as I am about a market and desperate to have one in the West, I think in 2045, there will no longer be a market. I think, in fact, what's going to happen is we will have air traffic control, so to speak, that manages, again, through completely seamless, just like your cell phone doesn't drop. Remember, we used to get cell phones, they would drop all the time because you went tower to tower, carrier to carrier. I think that goes away. I think we end up with an air traffic control mechanism that's all done by computers. I think blockchain trading or whatever daughter or son of blockchain trading occurs so that you and I could trade power even though we're thousands of miles apart. I see the low curves completely flattening out because of storage and because of generation at the home. I see the electric meter going away. And I don't mean that we're not going to meter electricity. I think the device, the box, look, three things haven't changed in 100 years: a saddle, a pencil, and the footprint of an electric meter, right? And why is that important? Well, number one, it lowers cost to customers/members. But number two, if we put the intelligence more remote, we can do all of these things in terms of balancing the system. Today, when I look at our footprint, and it said we're blessed and cursed with growth, we start looking transformer by transformer to the loading to figure out which ones we can change, which ones aren't heavily loaded. And if I can do that more seamlessly, I can then operate my system better. And I agree with you 100% in terms of reliability. I think we've already moved past the point where our human dispatchers and controllers can actually act in real time to make decisions, right? We always have a little bit of a lag. Look, let's face it. If the world was perfect, we wouldn't need markets, right? Everything would be seamless. Now we need that kind of convention, but I think over time, technology takes over. We have an air traffic controller on one hand and thousands of points of light, so to speak, on the financial component. This is the only industry that I've come across in my whole career where air traffic control also sells the seats on the airplane. And I think that leads to perverse incentives, not from the management standpoint, but from those people playing into that market.
Yeah. Oh, Mark, we all hear you, distribution, right, focus. And then Larry, you also mentioned the 25%, right, from distribution. But a lot of focus actually, is in the transmission side. For example, the IIJA build a better grid, right, focusing on transmission, new transmission line. So how should DOE or policymakers actually capture and support this reality? And how can suppliers like some of us and approach and support the distribution sector? Mark.
Stop studying, start building.
Sorry. Okay.
Right? We know where the lines need to go. We need to rebuild the 7 AC/DC ties across the West and the one from Texas into Mexico. Let's put the money out now, complete the intertie line, which goes from the Pacific Northwest down to Los Banos in California, skips 212 miles of desert, picks up again in Arizona. Do those projects now that we know. Stop messing around. Let's get them built, and then we can develop what we need for the future. But there's projects on the ground today. Transwest Express has been, heck, I signed the record of decision in 2015. You know how much steel's in the ground? Zero. All right, we've got to get over this study. I've said this to DOE, so I'm not shy, as you can tell. But we need to get building, and that's the critical nature. I can't wait. That's why I have to act like we are and react like we are.
Yeah. Larry, do you have any comment?
Well, I would start with, we need to rebuild what we have. So start there. We all know that getting permits, new lines, et cetera, it takes forever. I mean, 15, 16 years on the west. So start with the lines that we have. And we know we have a lot of projects where conversions need to take place and reconductors, rebuilds need to take place. So start there. And, you know, what we mentioned to Maria Robinson and team is that, can they help us, you know, where in the West, most of the land is forest, federally owned or BLM land. And so if you've got lines that are going across those lands, let's make it quick. Let's get on with it. Don't have to restart it for, 15 years to get something out of the ground. That's the only way we're going to make a difference there. The other one is look for where there's excess in the system and where can it be moved. So I'm going to use British Columbia and Alberta as the example. 45 gigawatts of generation, 25 gigawatts of peak load. There's less than 4 gigawatts of transmission between the US and Canada in the West. So you got 20 gigawatts of energy sitting up there that can't go anywhere. And I say to us, why can't we tap into it?
Any questions from the audience? Oh, there's one over there.
Hi, Barbara Tyron. I'm director of the Macro Grid Initiative at ACOR. Great panel. I really enjoyed this. And I'm particularly intrigued with Mark Gabriel's air traffic control system and how that might lead into interregional transmission and what the value of that would be. I'd be interested in that perspective from all the panelists.
Well, again, right now we're still in a very interesting time, right? We've got markets competing with each other to expand. So the interest in having an air traffic control system across the country is limited by self-interest. And no disrespect to our friends at MISO, PJM, and all that. That's not what I'm saying. We need to get beyond that to say, what does the world look like in 2045? What is the need that we have as an industry? What do I need as a distribution utility right now? Heck, I'd take anybody to be able to buy and sell power directly. I don't have that right now in the West. But over time, we've got to make the right steps to recognize the fact that the world has changed. Centralized generation is going away. By the way, I've made a lot of money in coal in my career. This is not being against coal. I support nuclear. I support all of the above. But what we need to figure out is how we're going to manage in a world that doesn't have that base load, doesn't have the system inertia. And that's my biggest concern as I sit here today.
Okay. We have another question here. Go ahead.
Sure. So good morning, everyone. My name is Nekabari Goka. I work as a principal in corporate strategy at Exelon, and my team is responsible for DER integration across all of Exelon's distribution company utilities. So I am actually pretty bullish on markets. And I think some of the biggest challenges that I have is, if there's anything that your comments and sort of panel has really highlighted, is this idea that the traditional divide between load and generation is really sort of merging moving forward with technology. So my question is, compared to the wholesale market, I think the market that we have in that case, the value of participation in the wholesale market is derived by LMP. At the distribution level, we don't have that kind of indicator. So the bullish part of me states that there's going to be something moving forward that sort of takes down that LMP structure and kind of creates it, call it local flexibility markets, a local capacity market. I think Australia kind of does a version of it. So my question is, what are some of the challenges that you all think exist in the context of making that move from that LMP structure at the bulk power system level to maybe kind of repeating that kind of structure at the distribution level?
Okay.
Sure. I'll take the answer. Excellent questions, by the way, and I can tell you're really deep into it. I really strongly believe in the market. and I wouldn't have been at Cal ISO if I wasn't. And the market, it really is nothing more than sending the right signals, so the right collective of everybody builds the right transmission and builds the right generation and try to distribute things correctly. The LMP price is really down to a node of a distribution. And I really threw the concept is DSO is very critical, and they're still at the beginning, infancy, of what they need to do. And it might take them 20 years because the DSO have to take that node. I have 3,000, 4,000 nodes that I give prices down to a distribution. DSO have to take down and bring it down to a whole different level. And when you get that one, then you have actually a good market. And the market actually forces people to do the right thing. There is billions of money saved. It cannot be just for money. It has to be for the environment, for balancing resources. I wish the market will disappear and we don't need it. But it's the same concept. It says a typewriter disappeared. Typewriter didn't go away. It just went to a computer and a printer. And the market itself, it might end up with an ISO and a DSO and a whole new concept that 20 years from now, we don't know yet how it's going to materialize. But if you think about it, if I have a prosumers everywhere, then I have the right signals everywhere. And it really doesn't matter that 10, 20% of the people don't want to participate, or sometimes their internet is down. We really don't matter. As long as we have a system that actually balances the grid and focuses on reliability. I've been in this industry for so long that the best solution is to let people do what they want, and the more they have an incentive to do it right, the more reliable the grid is. And that concept works the same way that every one of us try to improve their jobs and the whole industry improve. Same thing you can do with the grid. You send the right signals, you let them set things correctly, and everybody just wants to make more money or less money or don't care. It balances the grid, the reliability. But it's 20 years away. DSO have to do what the ISO did in 20 years.
Okay,
I
so
don't know if it's 20 years, but I would also think priorities. Is it the constraint at the distribution, or is the constraint at the generation transmission? Because you could do the wrong thing there. And so I would just think about the priority, maybe the stacking of how those priorities would go.
okay, so we're running out of time. We're supposed to finish by 11:30. Yeah. So anything? So maybe one last question. What is the biggest industry trend? Just one thing within 10 years, maybe.
I think the one thing I would say the industry needs to do is collaboration.
Collaboration.
We
okay.
went from
One thing.
just pure collaboration. I'll do that. Collaboration across the board.
That's a new trend. Okay, the trend. Very.
Let's see, I'll go with sensors and AI.
Two things. Oh, okay, sensor. Okay, we'll take
I'm
it.
going to go with one, shared energy economy. That we share the relationship with our members / consumers / generators, but we make sure that the dollar flow is correct, that everybody can participate.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much.